You just warmed a bottle of formula, checked the temperature on your wrist, and handed it to a baby in a heated room. If that baby gets sick tonight, a doctor is a phone call away. Now go back 40,000 years. Same baby, same need for milk and warmth. But there is no formula, no bottle, no doctor, no heated room. There is a cave, a fire that has to be fed all night, and a winter outside that can freeze a newborn in a matter of hours. Roughly half of the babies born into that world did not live to see their first birthday. Half. And of the ones who did, many never made it to adulthood. And yet, you are here, which means somewhere in that brutal cold, a baby who could easily have died survived long enough to grow up and have children of their own, over and over, in an unbroken line that reaches all the way down to you. So how did they do it? How did people with no medicine, no science, and no safe place keep something as fragile as a newborn alive through the Ice Age? If you find this kind of thing fascinating, a like and a subscribe genuinely help a small channel like this one keep going. Let's start with the number, because it tells you everything about how hard this was. For most of human history, losing a baby was not a rare tragedy. It was expected. Studies of hunter-gatherer groups and ancient burial sites point to the same grim range again and again. Somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 of all children died before the age of 5. Think about what that means for a single mother. Over her life, she might give birth 6, 7, 8 times, and watch half of those children die. You grew up assuming babies survive. It is the default. A death is shocking, unusual, something that makes the news. For your ancestors, it was reversed. Survival was the surprise. Every child who made it was a small miracle that the whole group had fought for. So they were not careless about it. Just the opposite. When something is that hard to keep, you build your entire way of life around protecting it. And that is exactly what they did. But before we get to how they kept a baby alive, you need to understand something strange about how that baby arrived in the first place. Because compared to almost every other animal on Earth, human birth is a disaster. Walk out into that Ice Age landscape and watch a horse give birth. Within an hour, the foal is standing. Within a day, it can run well enough to follow the herd. A baby antelope is on its feet almost immediately, because a newborn that cannot run is a newborn that gets eaten. Now look at a human baby. It cannot walk. It cannot crawl. It cannot hold up its own head. It cannot cling to its mother the way a baby monkey clings to fur. It can do almost nothing except cry, and crying in a landscape full of predators is the worst possible skill to be born with. It will be a full year before it takes a step, and years more before it can survive even a moment on its own. Why would evolution do that to us? The leading explanation is a trap our own bodies walked into. We stood up and started walking on 2 legs, which narrowed the hips. Then our brains got enormous, so you have a species with a large-headed baby trying to fit through a pelvis built for walking upright, and those 2 things are in direct conflict. The compromise seems to be that human babies get born early, unfinished in a sense. They come out while the head can still just barely make it through, and then do the rest of their growing on the outside, helpless, for years. Every human you have ever met was born too soon, because the alternative was not being born at all. And that has one enormous consequence. It made birth itself dangerous. Not uncomfortable, dangerous. A birth that goes wrong with a baby stuck in the wrong position is a birth that can kill the mother and the child, and there was no surgeon standing by. So your ancestors did something no other animal really does. They helped. A chimpanzee mother goes off alone and gives birth by herself. Human women almost never do. Across nearly every culture ever studied, women give birth surrounded by other women who know what to do. How to turn a baby. How to talk a frightened mother through it. What to do afterward. Midwifery might be one of the oldest professions we have, older than farming, older than writing, and it existed for the same reason everything else in this story does. Because our babies are too hard to bring into the world alone. The very first thing that kept an Ice Age baby alive was a pair of experienced hands that had done this before, which sets up the rest of it perfectly. Here is the first thing that kept those babies alive once they arrived, and it is probably not what you would guess. It was not a clever tool or a secret remedy. It was other women. We tend to picture a caveman family as a mother alone with her baby, maybe a father off hunting. But that image is wrong. Human babies are almost impossible to raise alone, and your ancestors knew it long before anyone could explain why. A mother in a foraging group was surrounded by helpers. Her own mother, her sisters, aunts, older children, other women in the group who had babies of their own. Scientists have a name for this. They call it cooperative breeding. It means a child is not raised by one person, but by a network. And it turns out humans are one of the only primates that does this at scale. A chimpanzee mother guards her infant and lets almost no one else touch it. A human mother hands her baby around the fire to a dozen trusted hands, and that sharing is one of the reasons our species survived. Here is the part nobody expects. There is strong evidence that grandmothers, specifically, were the secret weapon. In most animals, females die not long after they stop being able to reproduce. Humans are strange. A woman can live for decades after her last child, and for a long time, scientists could not figure out why evolution would keep her around. The answer seems to be babies. A grandmother who was too old to have more children of her own could pour all of her energy into keeping her grandchildren alive, gathering food for them, carrying them, watching them so the mother could work. Groups with active grandmothers simply lost fewer children. So your ancestry may owe its very existence to tired old women who refused to stop working. The next time someone tells you elders are a burden, remember that you might not be here without them. Now, cooperation solves one problem, but it does not solve the most basic one of all. A newborn needs milk, and only a mother's body makes it. So what happened when a mother could not? This is where it gets both beautiful and heartbreaking. If a mother died in childbirth, which happened far more often than it does today, her baby faced almost certain death. There was no other food a newborn could survive on. No cow's milk waiting in a jar. No formula. Nothing. The only hope was another woman who was already nursing. Another mother in the group who would put a second baby to her own breast and feed too. We think of shared breastfeeding as strange today. For your ancestors, it was often the thin line between a baby living and a baby dying. A woman feeding a child that was not hers was not doing something unusual. She was doing something the whole group depended on. And this connects to something clever that their bodies were doing without anyone deciding it. Ancient mothers breastfed for a very long time. Not months, but years. 3, sometimes 4 years per child. There is a reason, and it is smarter than it sounds. Intense, constant breastfeeding tends to delay a woman's fertility. It naturally spaces births apart. In a world where you have to physically carry every small child while walking miles a day, you cannot have 3 helpless infants at once. It would be a death sentence for all of them. So the long years of nursing quietly spaced the children out to roughly 1 every 3 or 4 years, which was about the maximum a mother and her helpers could actually keep alive. No one wrote this down as a rule. Their bodies and their way of life simply arrived at the spacing that worked, and the groups that got it right are the ones that left descendants. All right, so the baby has milk. Now it has to survive the cold, and this is where your ancestors were up against something that could kill in a single night. A newborn cannot regulate its own temperature the way you can. It loses heat fast, and Ice Age winters were not forgiving. Hypothermia was probably one of the biggest killers of infants, quiet and quick. So keeping a baby warm was not comfort. It was life and death, every single night. Their solution was their own bodies, skin to skin, wrapped in layers of soft animal fur. The baby was kept pressed against a parent's chest, where the warmth was steady and the heartbeat was familiar. Modern hospitals rediscovered this. They call it kangaroo care, holding premature babies bare against a parent's skin, and it measurably improves survival. Your ancestors were doing the exact same thing 40,000 years ago because they had no other choice. Then there was the carrying. A baby left on the ground was a baby exposed to cold and to predators. So mothers made slings from soft hide and carried their infants against their bodies all day while they gathered and walked. It kept the baby warm, it kept it safe, and it kept it close enough to nurse the moment it needed to. That simple loop of fabric may have saved more infant lives than any tool they ever made. Now for the part that will make you a little uncomfortable, because every one of these videos has one. At some point, a baby has to move from milk to solid food, and a baby has no teeth and cannot chew. Today, you open a jar of soft puree or blend it yourself. Your ancestors had no jars and no blenders, so the mother chewed the food herself, softened it in her own mouth, and passed it directly into the baby's mouth. It sounds gross to us now, but think about what it actually did. It broke tough food down into something a toothless infant could swallow. And here is the twist scientists now suspect. It may have passed helpful bacteria and even a bit of the mother's immunity straight to the child. That mouthful you would find disgusting might have been one of the reasons the baby's gut and immune system got the head start it needed. What looks like the crudest possible feeding method may have been quietly protecting the child. So the baby has milk, warmth, and food. There is one danger left, and it is the one they could do the least about. Sickness. An infection that a course of antibiotics would clear up for you in a week could kill an Ice Age baby in days. A fever, a bad case of diarrhea, a lung infection. These were terrifying because there was no cure, only care. And care is exactly what they gave. Here is something that surprises people. Those long years of breastfeeding were not just food. Breast milk carries the mother's antibodies directly to the baby, a living shield against disease. A child nursing for 3 or 4 years was being handed its mother's immune defenses that whole time. It was the closest thing to medicine they had, and it came from the mother's own body. Beyond that, they used what the land offered. Certain plants, certain leaves, remedies passed from grandmother to mother to daughter, across countless generations. Some of it did nothing. But some of those plant compounds were genuinely useful, and the knowledge of which was one of the most precious things a group owned. It lived in the memory of the oldest women, which is one more reason those grandmothers mattered so much. And when nothing worked, they did the only thing left. They held the child. They kept it warm, kept it close, and stayed with it. Sometimes that was enough for the baby to fight through on its own. Often it was not. Which brings us to the hardest truth in all of this, and I want to be honest about it. For all their care, they still lost so many. A mother in that world had to find a way to keep loving and keep trying while burying child after child. That is a kind of strength most of us will never be asked for. The ones who survived, the ones you descend from, were carried through by mothers and grandmothers and whole groups who refused to give up on a fragile life even when the odds said they should. So how did ancient humans keep babies alive with no medicine, no science, and no safe place? They did it by refusing to do it alone. A mother had her mother, her sisters, the other women, the elders, the whole group. Milk was shared. Warmth was shared. Knowledge was shared. A baby was never one person's responsibility. It was the group's most precious project. That is the thread that runs through every one of these stories. Your ancestors did not survive because any single one of them was strong. They survived because of each other. And the proof is sitting right there. You. You exist because a long line of people you will never know decided that a small, fragile, screaming life was worth everything they had. If that hit you the way it hit me, subscribe and stick around, because next time we are going back into that same brutal world to answer another question about how they actually pulled it off. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.